Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Body's Energies, a missing link in your wellness toolkit. I'm going to talk about the title of that in just a second. But first, I'd like to cover a few little housekeeping things. First of all, my friend Uta Monker has volunteered to be my moderator. So she's going to help if anyone has any issues with any tech issues, anything like that. She also is going to be monitoring question and answers in the chat. Please do feel free to put some questions in the chat. And I just want to introduce her. She is an entrepreneur herself. She's the president of Monker Consulting, which is a nimble agency living at the intersection of language, marketing, and technology. They connect entrepreneurs, niche agencies, and organizations to the world that needs what they offer through services such as translation, creation of marketing materials, and localization of digital media. So that is my friend Uta. And Uta, would you mind muting? Thank you. So I mentioned questions. I will kind of try to take them at the end of different sections. And then I will be making some references to research and things like that. So I made a very informal bibliography that I will show you at the end so you can do a screenshot of it. But Uta has also kindly offered to drop the links into the chat as they come up. So to get started, I'm very excited to be here. I'm very excited for the opportunity to share the work that I do in this venue. It is a little bit of a different venue for me. There may be people who aren't familiar with any kind of energy work and things like that. And so I'm really grateful for Twin Cities Startup Week that they were open to this kind of presentation. And I do want to mention about the title. A few days ago, I was communicating with a friend. She was running her eyes over my PowerPoint and things like that. And she said, you know, Therese, I'm not sure you should include that woo-woo part of it. She said, because what you do isn't really that woo-woo. And she doesn't really have a background in energy work. And she said, and I worry that there's a little bit of a negative connotation. And I said, yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Woo-woo can have a negative connotation. But when I was making the title, the hitch was that people know exactly what you mean when you say woo-woo. So I hope no one takes offense at that it's slightly negative about this kind of whole area. But the other funny thing is at least two people, when they have seen or heard my name, they have said, oh, you're the person doing the woo-hoo presentation. So I kind of like that. If we get some woo-hoos out of this, that is wonderful for me. So I'll start with a little bit of an introduction about myself. I have a background in education. I have a master's degree from the University of London Institute of Education. And I have been a teacher trainer for more than 20 years. And I also have developed curriculum for English language learning. That's my subject area. And I have co-authored many textbooks for English language learning and online materials and tests and things like that. And that's kind of background to say that energy work wasn't really anything on my radar. I mean, I was teaching grammar, and I didn't really expect to get into energy work. But it has now become a huge part of my life. I kind of probably at least 15 years ago started taking various classes. I've taken classes in several different modalities, and I'm going to use the word modality as I go along. That's just a set of practices. You may have heard of something like Reiki or healing touch. Those are modalities. So I have taken classes in many different modalities, and I ended up choosing to get certified in two different modalities that I'll talk about later on in the presentation. I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this presentation is that there are different reasons that people get interested in energy work. Some people are just curious and they just love learning about it. And maybe that kind of person isn't as interested in this kind of presentation because they'll probably just seek out anything and learn anything. I think another situation where people look to energy work is if they have some kind of situation where conventional medicine is not giving them answers. And, things like chronic pain. I think that it's pretty widely accepted that for certain types of chronic pain, doctors don't really have a lot of answers. And so it might be something like that where somebody turns to something like energy work to support them. The other thing that I have come to believe, and this is really what I want to share with you, is that working with your body's energies, and we'll talk more about what I mean about that in a minute, but working with your body's energies has become a part of my well-being practice and my well-being toolkit, really. I'm the kind of person that, I try to exercise, I try to eat right, I work on things. And for me, using the techniques that I know from the modalities that I've studied have become an integral part of my daily life. And they support me to deal with life's challenges, to feel that I'm more resilient in my daily life, in my work life, really in every aspect of my life. It really has been life-changing for me. And so I want to share that concept with you because I think it's also a piece that maybe people don't really realize that it could be a part of your kind of wellness toolkit. Now, I want to make very clear, it's never a substitute for licensed medical or mental health care. Absolutely not. It should never replace that. And the other thing is, if this whole area doesn't resonate with you, I totally honor that. I have family and friends who, kind of have listened to me, learned a little bit from me, and they're like, yeah, this isn't really my thing. And I totally respect that. And I totally honor that. Although I will say some of them come to me when they're kind of desperate, but that's another story. Let me give you a little bit of an overview of the objectives and how I've structured the session. I want to discuss a little bit about, again, what I mean by energy, what I mean by energy work. And I also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the science that is out there. And one of the reasons I feel strongly about this is because I have had people say things like, yeah, I'm not open to that because it's all woo-woo. It's all quackery. There's no science to support it. Well, in fact, there is a surprising amount of science. Now, I'll freely admit some of it maybe is a little squishy, some of it maybe isn't quite conclusive, but in fact, there's a lot going on to support this type of work. I also honestly feel like the wellness industry has become a little bit of the Wild West, where kind of anything goes. And in my opinion, sometimes people are not staying within their scope of practice. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well, which we'll get into is really my second kind of area that I'd like to just discuss a little bit, kind of guidelines and criteria for looking at different modalities or different sets of practices. Because I think that this is another thing that can be off-putting to people if they think, well, I might be interested in exploring something like this, but I have no idea where to start. And I have no idea how to assess all the different modalities that are available nowadays. So I'd like to do that. And then finally, I'd like to show and practice a few easy techniques that I think are incredibly helpful. And you can take them and try using them in your daily life and see what you think. That's part of what I love doing, is I love sharing the work that I do like this, that people can take it, add it to their toolkit if they want to, and pull it out when they need to. So before I get into my PowerPoint, I have a pretty simple PowerPoint that I'm going to use. But before I get into that, I'd like to actually invite you to join me in one of the first techniques or practices that I'd like to share with you today. And it's basically just some work with the breath. Now, here's the thing. I personally have come to believe that working with your breath is actually energy work. And you'll probably see why as I go through the PowerPoint. But I really believe that it is an integral part of any kind of energy work that you might want to do. And I'll say as an aside here as we go through that there are some modalities or practices that may not be energy work per se, but that there's kind of overlap. And I'm thinking of things like yoga. I'm thinking of things like breath work. Things like somatics is a whole new area. Anything mind body, there's probably going to be overlap with what I consider energy work. So just have that in the back of your mind. So going back to the breath work, there are so many different types of breathing techniques that you can try. And there is actually interesting research going on where people are working with breath and hooking people up to biofeedback machines to see what's happening and using it for things like just relaxation and de-stressing, but also things like sports performance and things like that. I keep it really simple with my breath work. There's two things that I do on a regular basis. And I can guarantee almost every time I'm in the car driving, I do this. So the first thing is when you're viewing breath work as energy work, I encourage you to breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. And my perception of it is it's helping to move energy when you breathe out. If you don't buy that, that's okay. But I think if you play with it, you'll notice, like, if you pay attention to, oh, I'm going to breathe out this stress, you may feel that it actually does help decrease that stress a bit. The other piece with my breathing, the second piece to it, is that I do a longer exhale. So, for example, I might do a 4-count inhale and then a 6-count exhale. And the reason for that is A, it feels good to me, but B, there's research that supports that longer exhale taps in to a relaxation response in your body. It's related to the vagus nerve, if anyone has heard of the vagus nerve, but it really taps into a relaxation response when you have that longer exhale. I'll also say that some people, for various reasons, find that the idea of just doing a deep breath a little uncomfortable. And that's why I like this idea of a slightly shorter inhale, slightly longer exhale. So that was a lot of explanation of a breath. So let's try a couple of these together. So I'm going to invite you to, actually, it's helpful to have your feet flat on the ground and just feel kind of solid. And then breathe in through your nose and out through the mouth. So for me, and this is a very typical count that I do, it felt like about 3 and 6. But you may find that you like a different amount of time. So let's just do a couple more like that. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. You may notice in your belly, you may feel that expansion and contraction. That's great to bring that awareness if that feels right for you. Let's do one more. Breathe in through the nose and out through the mouth. Now, for me, I can say that helped me feel just a little bit calmer, just brought me down a little bit, obviously, a little nervous about doing a presentation. That just helped bring me down. Feel free, if anyone has any comments, about what you noticed with that, feel free to throw it in the chat. And I always say, whenever I'm working with anyone, any comment is fine. Even if you want to say, Therese, I didn't like that one bit. I am totally okay with that, because it's all about trying to guide you to the practices that work best for you. All right, so looks like Susie. Hi, Susie. Susie says, I felt calmer too. I've been in my head all day. So yeah, one of the things I think it's, Susie, you said you've been writing all day, which woohoo, I hope you got a lot done. But anytime you're in your head, when you're at work, when you're at the computer all day, it's great to just take even a few breaths will bring you down, and not bring you down, bring your energies into a calmer state. Susie, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate it. All right. So now I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to start with my PowerPoint. All right.
So Teresa, before you move on to that, Jake also had a question.
Do you want to read me the question, or shall? Okay.
Yeah. So he was wondering if you had a preference for diaphragm versus lung chest breathing.
That's a great question. I'm going to say a couple of things about that. It can depend on the type of breathing you're working with. There are yogic breath practices where you actually pay attention to all of it and you work through them in a certain order. The thing is, diaphragm is going to probably be better, because you really want to bring that breath down and fill it up. Having said that, if it doesn't feel right to you right at this moment, for whatever reason, don't do it. You'll probably hear me say this a couple of times, because I really am not a one size fits all person for any kind of energy work. So if it doesn't feel right to you for whatever reason right now, maybe don't go into that deep diaphragm breathing, big belly breath. One thing I will say is that sometimes people who have experienced a lot of trauma actually find it uncomfortable to try and do that kind of deep breathing. And you maybe need to start just focusing on paying attention higher in the chest. Jake, I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to drop more in the chat, and Uta will help me with that. Anything else right now, Uta?
No.
Okay. All right. So you can see my first slide though, right? All right.
Yes.
So here's where we're going to start. What is energy, and are we made of it? And this is actually a little bit squirrely to answer. Okay. Defining, let me see if I can get my laser pointer up. Defining energy is actually harder than you think. There are different types of energy. There's electrical energy, there's thermal energy, there's kinetic energy, there's electromagnetic energy. And so defining it can be a little squirrely. What I usually say to people, I think for many people, they've never actually thought before, oh, I'm a physical body, but am I energetic? And a lot of people haven't ever thought of it that way before. And maybe they have a reaction to the idea like, no, that's not possible. That's just wacky. But here's the thing. One of the easiest ways to get people to switch on with this is to think about EEGs and EKGs. They measure electrical activity in your brain and in your heart. The other example I usually give to people is, if your heart is starting to flatline, what do? They hit you with electrical current, because our heart is actually a very electrical organ. And there's very interesting research on that, which we won't get into a lot today, but just that our hearts give off an electrical field that they are now able to measure. So usually when I start talking about things like that, people go, "Oh, yeah, okay." I heard somebody, a practitioner recently talk about how she was going to do a presentation. She was traveling to it. She had a laptop, and on the laptop she had a presentation. And on the way, all of her cords fell out of her bag. So she showed up at a presentation with a laptop, with her presentation on the laptop, but no cords. And she kind of said, I see it as, the brain is, well, the body is the hardware, your computer. The brain is your software. And then all the cords is the energy that kind of puts it all together. I kind of like that analogy. I don't know if everyone would, but that was helpful to me as well. In terms of just thinking about, are we energetic beings? There are traditions that go back thousands of years where they talk about a vital force, a life force, and it's sometimes called ki or chi or prana, depending on the tradition. I believe it even shows up in religious traditions as well. This idea that there's some kind of subtle life force within us. And I also added subtle energy at the bottom here because, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a minute. I mean, at the top, I'm just saying, look, we are some kind of energy. There's no doubt that we have like electrical current going through our body. But then you can get into more subtle energies. Often people talk about meridians. Meridians come up, if you know anything about acupuncture, meridians come up. They are basically channels or rivers of energy that go through the body. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The aura, or sometimes called the biofield. Okay. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide here. The other thing that I didn't put on the slide, partly because I was a little worried, because I am not a scientist, or especially not a physicist, but quantum physics is really showing lots of hints about this idea that there maybe is more to us than just the physical body. And some of the recommendations I'm going to make for books or links or whatever, you can access more information about that. But I do find that quite interesting as well. So, any comments or questions from that? Okay, I'm going to keep going. Oh, I forgot one little story that I just learned. I did not know this. So apparently, I don't know if you remember back in the 1990s when some British scientists first cloned the sheep, Dolly. Now, apparently, when they were doing this, when they had everything in place that seemed like the clone should work, but it wasn't working, and they couldn't figure out what they were missing to make it start growing. And what they found is they just needed to introduce a tiny amount of electrical charge. And that is when the clone started growing. And that is how Dolly came to be. So I do think that is a pretty interesting little anecdote about the idea of energy, or at least electrical charge, being involved in living beings. So let's move on a little bit to the idea of how much science is there. As I said, I do often come across people who say, well, there's not really any science to support it. And that isn't true. Now, we'll talk about some things that are a little controversial that haven't been fully proven, but there actually is some science. And I have a reaction to people saying, well, these things are not proven. when it may be sometimes they aren't proven, and I freely admit that, but sometimes it's just that they haven't been studied. Because the reality is that you have to take into consideration is that these kinds of things may not be the highest priority for research. Let's face it, pharmaceuticals are going to produce a lot of money. So people are going to put a lot of effort into researching those kinds of things. So I think I'm not trying, I really don't want to make too many claims about what there is, but I also have a reaction if people say there's nothing. So first of all, kind of what I said in the previous slide as well, there are thousands of years of traditions of working with the energies of the body. And here, TCM, what I mean is traditional Chinese medicine, which goes back thousands of years. Ayurveda, which goes back thousands of years in India. So there really is, I read somewhere recently, like an Egyptian papyrus that talked about the laying on of hands for healing. And again, that's not scientific proof, but I think you have to say, well, if there's something that's been going on for this many years, there's something there. So let's get into drill down a little bit to what evidence there might be. So I'm going to start actually with the aura, which is also called the biofield. Doesn't matter, either one. If you like, you can kind of view this as the spacesuit or the energetic spacesuit around your body. I've heard people explain it that way, and that works for me. But here's the thing. It's still a little controversial. But in 1935, a professor of anatomy at Yale University called Harold Burr, he had this voltometer. He created this voltometer to be able to measure electrical current, very subtle electrical current. And some of you may have heard of this because he worked with salamanders in particular. And what was very interesting about this is with the voltometer that he used, he was able to see that a salamander in the egg had an electrical shape around it that was the shape that it would grow to be when it was full grown. So he theorized that was some kind of aura or biofield. I think at that time he called it a life field. And it's interesting because at a similar time, there was a Russian scientist who was also doing research. And you may have heard of something called Kirlian photography, which you find nowadays in places like Sedona a lot, where you can get a photograph of your body that will also show the energies, which is supposed to be the aura or the biofield around it. He did something called the phantom leaf effect, where he took a picture with this special camera that he developed, and he took a picture of a leaf, and then he cut the leaf in half and then took a picture again. And he claimed, and this is important to say, he claimed that you could still see the image of the full leaf. Now, there's been a lot of controversy around this. Some people still don't accept it because they said, well, it's coming from the moisture of the leaf. That's what's causing it. People later on did do research where they actually took out the moisture. They put it into lucite blocks and were able to show that it probably wasn't the moisture, but there's still controversy. Meridians, evidence of meridians. Now, meridians are if you know about acupuncture, they put needles in at certain points on meridians to clear blockages with the meridians. Meridians have been mapped, but again, it's a little controversial. They were mapped originally in 1960 by a North Korean scientist. And then in 2016, some South Korean scientists replicated that study using nanoparticles to identify the meridians. Still some controversy around it. But I'm going to jump to acupuncture because acupuncture, there is research that absolutely supports the efficacy of it for many different conditions. What they don't know is that there's controversy around the mapping of the meridians, but they don't actually know the mechanism for why the acupuncture works. There are some theories, but they're not fully accepted theories. Now, again, I don't have a huge problem with the theories, but not knowing the mechanism entirely. I think that comes up a lot around energy work. They don't know the mechanism. Somebody pointed out to me once that we didn't know how aspirin worked for 100 years, but we still used it because we knew it was really good. I'm going to jump before. So acupuncture, I want to mention this book that's you can't see that because of the glare. It is called Energy Medicine by Jill Blakeway. And Uta, if you wouldn't mind dropping that in the chat. It is one of the best books that I have found that tells us where it's written by a woman who is a doctor of acupuncture and traditional Chinese medicine. But it's super interesting because she started going on a little journey because she started realizing there was more going on. So she started exploring other energy practices to kind of see if she could come to some conclusions. I like it because it's super readable. It covers a lot of the science, and it gives a lot of her personal story about how she moved through learning about different energy techniques. And some of it's a little bit out there. So the next person is William Bankston. And this, I love to tell people about this because most people haven't heard of him. He is a professor of sociology in a college somewhere on the East Coast. He, for years, has been doing these amazing research studies about healing mice that get injected with cancer. And his research, if you're interested, read his backstory because it's super interesting. He just fell into this and decided that he wanted to see if he could set up acceptable, solid research studies. And it went on for several years. There were fits and starts. He kind of went off track for a while. But bottom line, he has clear evidence that his approach, which is very specific, and I'll tell you that in a second, but his approach, it is very clear that those mice that are being injected with cancer are being cured. And he now trains people to actually use his techniques to work with people. Now, one of the cool things about what he does, he's got a very specific technique. I've not trained in it. I've read his book and I've listened to webinars with him. But when he started doing his research, he very specifically chose skeptics. He wanted skeptical people. He taught them the techniques and then he told them how to do it. He wanted people who didn't believe in energy work or the possibility of energy healing. And he got the results he got. Finally, here, I just want to mention the placebo effect because it does come up a lot. For example, in acupuncture, has been one of the criticisms and it's come up in a lot of things. The acupuncture, the research actually is totally beyond the idea that it could only be a placebo effect. But when you read about the placebo effect, here's the thing. Who cares? If somebody is getting benefit from acupuncture is a little bit more invasive, but a lot of these energy techniques are not invasive at all. They're very, very gentle. They're using hands, maybe not even touching the body. And so my thing is, well, if it's a placebo effect, but people feel better, I personally don't have a lot of problem with that. Again, I know some people might. So let's see. One of the things I thought of after I did this slide is for me, there might be kind of an analogy with like going to a personal trainer. If you go to a personal trainer, you want to know that they know their stuff, that they have done the research about what exercises are best for you in a given situation. But I don't need to know, I want to know that in general. I don't need to know every little thing. Like if I do this bicep thing, does science support that this? I don't ask those kinds of questions when I go to a personal trainer. So I think there's a part of it that for me personally, and again, I totally accept if you don't feel that way. For me, there's enough And then when I've started experiencing it and really feeling the positive effects, that's enough for me. I'm going to take a pause here. Uta, are there any questions or comments coming up?
Nothing
Okay.
yet.
So I want to talk a little bit about different practices and modalities. I was surprised to learn that some people have estimated that there are 250 plus modalities out there in the world. And that would include, like, as I mentioned, some of you may have heard of Reiki, you may have heard of healing touch, you may have heard of traditional Chinese medicine, acupuncture, things like that. But it also could include things like Sally Smith's energy healing technique, kind of like William Bengston has his own technique. So you can, I guess, I mean, I'm still shocked that there are 250 that people have identified, but it does include those really like small where somebody says, this is my modality, this is what I do. And I am not knocking that, but I think that if you think of 250 modalities, it is pretty overwhelming. And so I feel that I want to share with people questions to ask or at least consider if you are exploring energy modalities. If you're like, well, I think I'd like to do something, and then you look at a lot of times people offer things at your local spa or your local yoga studio, and you look and there's like 5 different modalities, and how do you make a decision about that? Now, part of it is just you might just say, oh, I connect, that person sounds really good, or that practice sounds really good. And if that works for you, that is absolutely wonderful. I think I also want to speak, though, to the people who maybe are hesitant to try anything because they're like, I'm not sure what I'm getting into. And I think it's absolutely valid to think about that. So here are some questions, and if anyone has any that you would add to this, I would welcome that. First, how much training is required? There are modalities, like I said, there are modalities where people just go, oh, I have this talent, and they say, I'm, Sally Smith's energy healing. And there are some where you can get certified in a weekend. Now, the training that I did, part of the reason, and I'm going to talk in a second about the modalities that I use, but part of the reason I chose the modalities I did is because they required quite significant training. And I can tell you about that. But I mean, one took me over a year. The other one took me 2 years to get certified in. And so that for me personally was important. The next thing I'd like to look at is, does it have a clear scope of practice? And this is where things I think can get kind of squishy, kind of squirrely pretty fast. A clear scope of practice. I am never going to tell any of my clients anything about vitamins or supplements they should take. I am not a certified nutritionist. I mean, I might have an informal chat where you chat about, what you eat. And, if they tell me they're, drinking 5 Coca-Colas a day and eating, chocolate all day, I might say, well, that might not be a good idea. But that's kind of common sense. But I would never, ever share information about something I saw on the internet about vitamins or something like that. I really believe that people should have a clear scope of practice. And to me, that includes being able to explain what your scope of practice is. So with one of the modalities I work with 8 different energetic systems. And I can tell you about each one of them. It's meridians, it's aura, it's chakra, and the list goes on. But that is my scope of practice within that modality. Now, because I've taken classes in so many different modalities, I think it's also important that if I'm moving into a modality that I only, what if I borrow something from a modality that I only took a weekend class at? I tend not to do that, but if I did, I would tell my client that. I also think within scope of practice is the question of ethics. Does your practice or your modality have a concept and a clear guidance for ethics? Again, both of the modalities that I chose had a very clear part of their curriculum that was involved with ethics and really thinking about challenging questions around ethics, signing an agreement around ethics within that modality. And to me, that's important. The next question is it spiritual? And this is it's a big one, because you can, if you don't have experience of energy work, you can guess. If you have experience of energy work, you already know this. So easily, when we're talking about things really subtle, it can get into spiritual practices very quickly. And some modalities actually have spiritual practice within them. And none of that is wrong or right. I just think people have a right to know that, and that you should feel comfortable asking about that. A client, not long ago, a client contacted me because she was interested in getting some sessions. And she said to me, I'm a little concerned because I went to a practitioner of a different modality. I have a strong Christian faith, and I didn't feel completely comfortable with that. She said, so can I ask you up front, is this a spiritual practice? And I said, no. What people bring they can bring their spiritual practice. I have no problem with that. But in and of itself, the work that I do does not have a spiritual component. And I said, so she said, I'll do a session. And I said, and I want to discuss this afterwards, because I want to make sure that you actually do feel comfortable that that was not part of it. And she said, yep, absolutely. That was exactly what I needed. And I said, thank you for asking about that, because very few people do. I think people sometimes think they can't, they shouldn't. I think actually a lot of these questions, people sometimes think, oh, I can't ask. No, you should ask. And if a practitioner reacts, with a little defensiveness, to me, that's a red flag. Okay. And finally, the last piece is, can you do it yourself, or do you need to go to a practitioner? And this may or may not be important to you. For me, it actually is really important. And you'll see the modalities that I ended up choosing have both components. There's a lot you can do yourself, which is partly why I'm here today. And there's a lot that you can do with a practitioner. But many modalities do not have that flexibility. Many modalities tend to be that you have to go to a practitioner for the work, which is great. It's fine if that's what you want. But I like working with people to show them about their energies and to give them things. I don't call it homework, but to give them things for their home care. And again, it's none of this should ever be this goes into scope of practice. None of this should ever be a substitute for licensed medical or mental health care. Now I'm quickly going to go in and show you my two modalities that I ended up choosing as the two that I wanted to get into. And maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. The first one is called, it has different names, EFT, which stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, or tapping. And emotional freedom techniques, I'll say EFT or tapping. I love it because it's a super easy self-help tool. You're going to learn it in 5 minutes, and you can use it after this class or this presentation however you want. I'm going to say that if you want to do deep work with it, you probably should go to a practitioner. But I'm a big fan of bathroom tapping. If you need to take a break in a meeting, you go take your bio break, and I'm going to go like this. You'll see why. I go in and I do a little bit of tapping, and whoo, it can shift your energies pretty quickly. The other thing I love about the EFT tapping world is they are pushing and pushing for scientific research. They are really, really going hard at it. And in the past few years, there's been so much that's been so cool coming out. So there are over 100 peer-reviewed studies, multiple meta-analysis of those. Most of the studies, except for one or two, show efficacy. And it shows, the multiple studies show efficacy for pain, anxiety, depression, trauma and PTSD, sports performance, test performance, weight loss. People use it for anything and everything. And you really can use it for anything and everything. I mean, even so little as, oh my gosh, this person is bugging me. If you have someone in your life and you can just, not in front of them, but tap on, this person really bugs me. I'd be very surprised if you don't notice a shift. The cortisol study is just astounding. Basically, this was a peer review. This was a gold standard study, and it's actually been replicated now. But basically, gave people an hour of tapping over a course of, I don't know, 8 weeks or something. Or another group got an hour of talk therapy, and then they had a control group. And they measured cortisol with saliva before and after the sessions. And what the first study found was that the control group had nothing, no difference. The talk therapy group had like a 14% drop in cortisol after their sessions, which is pretty cool. The tapping had a 23% drop in cortisol levels. And that was just after one session of tapping. And they did find that stayed stable over time. Now, the later study that replicated it found the cortisol drop with the tappers even more significant. Now, I jumped ahead, but presumably you know that cortisol is a huge stress hormone, and most of us get too much stress or too much cortisol in our body because of chronic stress. So if you have a tool that you can pull out of your back pocket and use anytime you want, it does look strange. You'll see that in a minute. That's pretty cool to me. The other modality that I use, let's see. Is called Eden Energy Medicine. And again, Uta can drop the EFT info and the Eden Energy Medicine info into the chat. This is based on the work of a woman named Donna Eden, who's still alive. She's in her 70s. And I want to get to our technique, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But I've given you the website. She's written multiple books. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the daily routine. But basically, it's a very comprehensive approach to balancing your body's energy. It works with 9 different energy systems. And you can work with a practitioner. And a lot of people just do exercises on their own. And there are exercises all over YouTube. You can find anything you want about Eden Energy Medicine. But this is pretty cool because Donna found when she was in private practice, before she developed her curriculum for teaching other people to do Eden Energy Medicine, what she found is that there were certain energetic imbalances that a lot of people had a lot of the time. When she was seeing clients in private practice, it'd be like, oh, this person has this. Oh yeah, this person has this too. So she started developing little exercises that people could do on their own to support those and help correct those energetic imbalances that she was seeing in a lot of different people. And she calls this the daily energy routine. I have linked her official version, but again, you can find a million versions on the internet. They're all wonderful. Once you learn it, it takes less than 10 minutes to do in a day. I mean, it could take 5 minutes once you learn it. And some people find it life-changing. I know people who've had significant changes in their health just from doing the daily energy routine. Now, I don't want to, say too much like, oh, that proves it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying people find noticeable differences with it. So I am going to, I've been talking a lot. Uta, any questions? Okay.
No.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing and I want to jump into, I got to get off my laser pointer. All right. Okay. So what I'd like to do is show you a couple of techniques. So let's start with EFT tapping. This looks so wacky when you first learn it. I once saw a woman doing it in the Aspen, Colorado airport, and just sitting there in the lounge. I was like, "Woohoo! You go!" It basically works by you focus on a problem, and you tap on points on meridians. I'm going to show you these tapping points we're going to tap together. And that's really all there is to it. The only other piece to it that people find a little counterintuitive is that you want to focus on the problem while you're doing it. Okay? A lot of times when we're struggling with something, we go, "Oh, I got to think positive. Oh, I got to try and say I'm okay." No. Actually, with EFT tapping, you get to focus on the negative as much as you want. And then the tapping helps diminish it. And again, with tapping, there's a lot of theories about the mechanism for why it works, but nobody knows for sure. But like I said, they now have so many studies about how the efficacy of it. So here's what you do. I'm going to invite you to tune in to your body or tune into your life and just pick, is there a minor stressor that you'd like to focus on? Do you have a minor ache or a pain? Or even just an area of tension in your body? So just take a second and tune in. Okay. And I hope that you found something to focus on. It doesn't have to be a big deal. And then I'll just take you through the tapping points. Now, when you're working with a practitioner, they're going to keep you focused on the problem by saying something and you repeat it. So if you feel like repeating, you're all muted. So if you feel like repeating, do that. Okay. And I'm focusing myself, I'm focusing on this tension in my stomach. Okay. So here we go. So you're going to tap on the inside of your eyebrow first. And you can do it on one side or you can do it on both sides. Doesn't matter, whatever you're drawn to do. Okay. And then you say, oh, this tension or this pain or this stress or this person that's bugging me. And don't forget to breathe. The next point is at the side of the eye, right at the temple. Okay, not on delicate tissue. It's outside on the bone. Again, both sides, one side, doesn't matter. The research has shown it doesn't have a huge difference. This tension, maybe this pain, focus on that pain. Don't forget to breathe. Okay, the next point is right under the eye, right under the pupil at the top of the cheekbone. Again, you can do both sides or just one side. If it freaks you out to tap at the top of your cheekbone, you can massage. That's totally fine. It doesn't matter. You're going to get the same effect. And then you focus this pain, this stress, this tension. Next point is under the nose. Right here, right in the middle. And if you're in the ballpark, you don't have to, as long as you're in the ballpark and you're just using the pads of your fingers to tap gently. And I apologize, I feel like I'm rushing this a little bit. And again, there's a zillion videos on YouTube that you can find. The next point is directly in the cleft of the chin, right in the middle there. These all are points on certain meridians, which I could explain, and I usually do in a session. Most practitioners don't, because a lot of practitioners don't have a lot of knowledge of the meridian system, but they all have relevancy in terms of their meridians. Okay. The next point is called the collarbone points. Well, I like to do both. Basically, where a man would have the knot on his tie, you find the corners of your collarbone right there, and then go down and out diagonally about an inch. And you're going to find a soft tissue spot. And for some people, this is often a little sensitive. If it's sensitive, that's okay. That usually means there's stuck energy. Okay, and you just tap here. And let's go back to our issue. Your stressor, your problem, your ache or pain. Okay. Next point is under the arm. It's like 4 inches down from the armpit and just right there. And you can do it like this, like a monkey. You can do it like this, whatever works for you. Think about the stressor. Think about the tension. Take a breath. Don't forget to breathe. Last point is the top of the head. Focus on the problem. Focus on the issue. And we're just going to do one quick round again, just so you feel comfortable with it and you get a little more time. So we're going to go inside of the eye, the start of that eyebrow point, outside of the eye at the temple. Focus on the issue. Under the eye, right at the top of the cheekbone. Under the nose. And there's not a set number for how much you tap on each point. Whatever feels right. Now the middle of the chin. Collarbones. Under the arm. Top of the head. And take a breath. And check in. Check in with your issue, whether it was an ache, a pain, a stressor. Does it feel as intense? And remember, anytime I ask this question, any answer is fine. There can be reasons that it actually increases. Usually people notice a decrease. So if anybody feels like sharing that, please drop it in the chat if you want to share any of your reactions, anything you notice. All right, so we only have a minute left. So I'm going to show you the one from an exercise from Eden Energy Medicine, which it's so calming. I just love it. For any time you're feeling super stressed out, you just take the palm of your hand, gently lay it over the forehead. Now, again, there's specific reasons. It's about meridian points that you've got on your forehead. Donna Eden, it's funny, she calls this the oh God pose sometimes, because if you think about it, if you're stressed out, a lot of times you go, oh God. So you put this hand here, and if you want, you can just stay like this and just take some breaths. If you want to add a little bit to it, you can take the other palm and put it right across the back of your head, right above the occipital ridge. And you just hold and breathe. Usually, if people are feeling very emotional, this can really bring it down fast. I sometimes encourage clients to actually lay down and pile up pillows so your elbows don't get sore, or get awkward. And you can do it for someone else as well. So we are at 3:59, and I want to be respectful of your time. So I don't want to go over. I would love to hear if anyone wants to share any reactions. And Uta can allow you to set your audio and video so you could actually speak if you want to. Or drop something in the chat. And I'm just pulling up the my contact information just to let you know that I do individual sessions in person or via Zoom. I do workshops, and I actually am putting a bunch of workshops on the schedule at a local yoga studio, which they will appear on my website in the next few days. And those are going to be either in person or virtual. You can choose. And then I would like to do a pilot program to support people using energy techniques in the workplace. So if anyone has any interest in that, please do contact me and let me know if you would like to learn more about that. I'd like to support people to learn some techniques that they can especially use in the workplace, but you can use them at any point in your life. And I'd also like to get feedback from people to get a little data about what they notice with it. I will go to the final screen, which is the bibliography. So feel free to take a screenshot. If that doesn't work for you, I can definitely send it to you. And then I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And again, if anyone has anything they'd like to share, I'd love to hear it.
Just a note, I've been trying to put some things into the chat, but it does not respect line breaks, so it doesn't really come
okay,
through
and
very
again,
well.
I have a summary of the techniques. So if anyone wants them, I can send them to you. You can, yeah. Christine, I love your question. How do you get skeptics to give energy work a try? It's not always easy. I think it depends on where their skepticism is coming from. If it's coming from some of the things we discussed today, like sometimes, a lot of times people are just a little overwhelmed and a little bit like, is this really valid or is this just kooky, whatever? So giving them a little bit of information like we talked about today can be helpful. The other thing is just to, say, hey, I'll give you a little sampler of what I do. See what you think. And it's hard sometimes, but really trying to hold the position of, if this doesn't resonate with them, I have to be okay with that. Because the other piece is sometimes it's just not the right time for somebody to buy into it. And again, I really try to respect that. But I do think it's a really important question. And it's just starting to talk about it more and talk about it in a more concrete way. So I hope some of the ideas from today will help you with that. I don't know if Grant's still here. Grant, I saw that you made a comment about it's very frustrating that naturopaths prescribe different treatments for the same condition. That is a very interesting comment. And what I would say is that one of my things about energy work is I don't believe in a one size fits all. I really do believe that we are all unique and different energetically. And so I work with a client to figure out what's right for them. And again, I have to have the openness to accept if they say, this doesn't feel right to me, this doesn't work for me. I have to try not to be threatened by that and say, okay, let's follow the breadcrumbs and see what we can figure out. So I don't know exactly where that comment was coming from, but I have sympathy for that frustration. I have experienced energy work specifically where it's been very one size fits all. And I discovered kind of the hard way that doesn't work for me. My energies are too sensitive. So it doesn't work for me to just have a one size fits all approach. Anything else? Oh, yay, Christine, you were still there. Yes, I agree, Christine. I truly believe in the benefits as well. And I also hope that more people start to explore it. And I feel like, people like you and me trying to educate people in a very, grounded and ethical way, I think that really is the way forward. I think a lot of people are really hungry for this. Life has been so challenging in the past few years. I think people are really looking for ways to support and feel more resilient as they go through life. So I agree with you.